Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, 5 Ways Medical Affairs Can Impact Clinical Outcomes, presented by Fierce Biotech and sponsored by H1. I'm Michelle Benz, Conference Production Director with Fierce Biotech, and I'm your moderator today, and I'm delighted to welcome today's speakers. We have Stacey Rivkin, Group Vice President of Strategic Solutions at H1, and we have Stacey and Luca Dezzani, Vice President Medical Affairs Solid Tumor at Johnson & Johnson. H1 is the connecting force for global HCP, clinical, scientific, and research information. The H1 Connect platform democratizes access to HCP knowledge and groundbreaking insights for life sciences, academic medical institutions, health systems, and payers. H1 Connect fuels a robust product suite that helps customers discover and engage industry experts, drive equitable research, access groundbreaking science, and accelerate commercial success with the most robust and accurate healthcare professional data. You can learn more at h1.com. And our speakers today are going to give you a brief introduction of a little bit about themselves as well. Stacey?
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Stacey Rivkin. I'm the Group Vice President of Strategic Insights at H1. My team is really responsible for making sure that our clients get the insights from our H1 Connect data. And I've been with H1 for 3 years, but I'm not new to H1 because I came over as a client. I spent 20 years of my career in pharma, focused on expert identification, profiling, and strategy, and looking forward to this discussion today and excited to talk about what we're doing and what we've seen in the industry as it relates to medical impact.
And Luca?
So good afternoon, everyone. And I'm Luca Dezzani with Johnson & Johnson. I'm a physician by training. I spent my entire career in oncology as a practicing physician first, and for the last several years in pharma. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I think this is a fantastic topic, and very much looking forward to the discussion.
So I have a question for you, Stacey. How have expectations for measuring the medical impact of medical affairs activities shifted in the past 10 to 20 years?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a really important one to level set the conversation, because what's transpired over the past couple of decades in medical affairs and in medical and life sciences as a whole has been a huge shift. And where we've seen those shifts happen, both in the science and the drugs that we're bringing to market, we've seen commensurate changes in how life science organizations are organized. And as such, medical affairs has really transformed, and you can read, dozens of articles about the kind of things that medical affairs has transformed over the past 20 years. But in one way, they've really been able to have a lot more resources and responsibility, right? The medical affairs role has gone from a support role to much more of a strategic role. And that's really based on the kinds of drugs we're bringing to market, the amount of information we have, as well as just the cross-functional alignment we really have across the organization. But with that increase in responsibility has also come a commensurate focus on making sure that what we're doing and how we're designing our KPIs are really associated with driving the impact that we're looking for in the healthcare landscape. And so what we've seen is we've changed a lot of the way we're measuring impact, and it's not okay anymore to just be measuring the basics. The expectations are a lot higher for medical affairs teams, and as such, we need to respond with those accurate and more impactful KPIs.
May I comment real quick on that as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, first of all, I agree completely. I think there are 3 aspects that I can think of right now when I think of the history and the evolution of how medical affairs has been trying to measure impact. And the number one challenge or kind of evolution that we've been going through is exactly what Stacey mentioned, which is medical affairs today is not the same it used to be 20 years ago. And therefore, what you want to look into, track, and measure over time has been evolving as a byproduct of the scope of medical affairs being changing and expanding over time. If you think about it, 15 years ago, medical affairs was pretty much 15, 20 years ago, medical affairs was legs on the ground, MSLs engaging with top thought leaders in the therapeutic area. Now, obviously, we do much more across data generation, insight generation, and so on and so forth. So that's probably one big driver of the evolution of the way we measure value in medical affairs. And the second area, which is a bit more recent, is the evolution of capabilities, meaning that so much of what we do today has a digital footprint. And anytime you want to measure impact or value of digital initiatives, obviously you need to have a different set of metrics and KPIs, which is actually a good thing because, quite frankly, measuring impact of anything digital is probably easier than maybe more traditional medical affairs activities. Number three, so the third aspect when it comes to measuring impact, it's probably been, I would say, a little bit of a mistake that we in medical affairs have been making for many years, which was trying to find KPIs or metrics that were common and kind of almost like one size fits all kind of metrics that were the same for all medical affairs organizations across all therapeutic areas. So pretty much borrowing from what commercial organizations do with by measuring revenues or sales. Unfortunately, it's not that simple in medical affairs. So there is probably not such a thing of one size fits all metrics or KPIs with medical affairs. It's a bit more nuanced, and you actually have to look into different dimensions if you really want to capture and measure the impact across all the different aspects of what we do. So this was really just to say, there is some complexity, but I think we have gone a long way, and I think today we're definitely going to dissect a little bit the topic by maybe looking specifically into the different dimensions and the different KPIs we have been using.
That's a good lead into our next question, Luca. What insights are we generating, and what are we currently measuring as impact metrics? And I'll let you answer first.
Yeah. So insight generation obviously is a key component of what we do, right? So we try to understand the treatment landscape. We try to understand where our medicines can fit in the treatment algorithm, what the data gaps are. And that's crucial in order to build a strategy that is going to address those gaps and needs. So insight generation is obviously a key component of what we do. However, as I mentioned earlier, we have several different ways of generating insights within medical affairs. Just to give some examples, we have insights coming from our MSLs in the field. We have advisory boards, meetings that we do with top experts, and that's a good way to generate insights. Obviously, we have now things like social listening, where you are actually looking into social media activity from different stakeholders, and so on and so forth. So for each one of those different channels, you actually have a different set of metrics and KPIs that you can use. And the interesting thing is that, especially when it comes to the digital component, again, it's fairly easy to measure impact, whereas maybe for the more traditional insight generation activities, it may be a bit more challenging. I guess the overarching principle is I don't necessarily care about what the volume of insights I get on a given day or month or year, to me is really about, okay, how did those insights help me to inform or change my strategy, right? That's really what matters. So it's not about how many data points, it's not about how many insights, it's really about those insights that were one way or another able to or help me to identify a better comparator for a clinical trial, or identify a better endpoint for a study, or customize and tailor my medical education to the particular segment or educational need that I have identified. So these are the kind of things that I think are important for us to measure. So every time we have insights that translate into a change in or improvement into our strategy and obviously in our tactics, that's the kind of stuff that we want to keep track on, measure, and act upon in terms of feeding that feedback loop.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything Lucas said. We've gotten so good at gathering insights, right? That's really where the medical affairs team has driven so much of its value and given back to the organization in such a huge way. We are experts in collecting insights and understanding the views, beliefs, and even understanding the advocacy of our HCPs. And we're really even good at taking those insights and actioning on them, right? We design strategies based on them. We take those insights and we translate them into the kinds of things we want to do for clinical trials or educational initiatives, et cetera. Where I think we want to take that next step is how can we look at those strategies and know whether or not they're successful? How can we start understanding how to measure whether or not what we've actually implemented is successful? And so a lot of it has to do with turning those, we're really good at looking inward, and how do we look outward at the landscape and see if what we're actually doing is having an impact on the healthcare landscape.
Now we're going to do a live poll. So everyone take a look at your screen. There's going to be a little poll that pops right up for you. So we're going to ask this question. Are you currently measuring the impact of medical affairs? There's a few options below. Yes, we are. No, not sure, or we haven't, but we plan to or are exploring it. So please take a minute to answer the poll. Are you currently measuring the impact of medical affairs? Yes, we are. No, not sure. We haven't, but we plan to or are exploring it. All right, looks like we're getting some results in. All right, what do you guys think?
So Michelle, could you possibly read off the scores for us?
Yes, we can pull up the results. No is 17%, so it's actually pretty good. That's exciting. Not sure is 27%, so that's actually a little bit higher than I guess I haven't than I expected. We haven't is 25%, so a quarter of our audience, it says we haven't yet, but maybe they're exploring it, debating it, or thinking about it. So that's the biggest three that we have, which is interesting.
So Luca and I have the benefit of actually having this conversation before and polling the audience with something very similar. And these results are a little bit different. Yes being 30%, no, not sure, we haven't, being the other 70%, right? I think that that's probably in line with what we've seen, is that people understand the need to do it, right? So we haven't, but we're exploring it, is a quarter of the audience. We may be doing it, but we're not sure exactly what we're doing it, is another quarter of the audience. And we haven't started doing it, is, less than 20%. I think that that's really where it's most exciting to be engaged right now, is that everybody understands the need to do this, right? And organizations have really started putting plans together to implement tactics that'll measure impact, but nobody's really sure if they're doing it right or if they're doing it well. And I think that that's probably why we've got so much interest in, attending this webinar today and understanding how can I start to show my organization the impact that my medical affairs team is having, and be able to, like Luca said, it's not going to be sales, right? We're not going to stand up there and talk about our revenue or our scripts, but we need to have our KPIs that we can say, here's what we did, here's what changed, here's what we were able to impact, and we can show you that change, specifically and objectively.
Yeah, I need to say, I'm a little surprised by only 30% of colleagues here actually measuring or having like KPIs they look into. And the main reason being that I totally understand and appreciate it's not an easy thing to do, and it may be very rudimental, right? It may be just that I'm tracking very basic KPIs, but not having any KPIs at all. How can you tell if you are doing a good job or not, right? I just find it hard to believe, and maybe it's also the way that the question was phrased. You know, if you ask me, is there in my organization opportunity to improve the way we measure impact? Yeah, of course there is, right? Am I doing everything perfect? Of course not, right? But do I have a set of metrics and KPIs that I'm keeping track of? Of course I do, right? I really want to know if I'm doing a good job or not. And if I'm not doing a good job, I want to be able to course correct and take action. So I think for those that are really not doing any measurement or tracking at all, I think there are very easy way to get started. And I don't want to jump ahead, but like share of scientific voice is a very commonly used and I would say standardized way of looking at measuring impact of scientific communication and medical education we do. There are other things that I think are probably even more impactful that look specifically into the particular objectives that your particular therapeutic area or your particular product require. And those are things like biomarker testing. So there are a bunch of things, and I'm sure we're gonna discuss that extensively today. But again, start small and start simple, but do have something that you are constantly looking into so that you can tell whether or not you are on the right track. I guess that's my advice.
All right. What are some of the ways that you've seen organizations measuring the impact of medical affairs?
I'll jump in and start here, Michelle. Thank you. So Lucas started to allude to some of the ways we've been seeing and supporting organizations measure their impact. I think it's important that we consider the activity metrics that we've been tracking, right? Those don't go away. They're kind of foundational for medical impact, right? We need to understand what we're doing in the field in order to understand what impact it's having. So understanding how many people are coming to our CMEs, who's coming to those programs, how much we're engaging with our KOLs, who we're reaching out to, who's getting our education. Those are all activity metrics that have been traditional and still have a place in the arena of measuring medical impact. But as you start to kind of climb up the pyramid, so to speak, and think about the other levels of medical impact, Luca mentioned what we believe is kind of the most leading indicator and also one of the easier ones to measure, which is share of scientific voice, right? So are people talking about you, your company, your molecule, right? There's a lot of noise in the landscape. And when they talk about your disease, do they talk about you? It's a important metric to understand because with all the competitive products we have out there, if you're spending resources, you want to make sure that you're actually getting that return with people talking about the things, with people talking about your company and your molecules. But it's not just talking about your company and your molecule. Are they talking about the things that are important to you? So medical affairs really is out there supporting a scientific platform, right? They're the foundational leaders in having HCPs understand the science behind our drugs. And as so, it's important to understand, are HCPs echoing back the information that you're sharing with them, the education that you're doing? Can we measure whether or not we're seeing HCPs talk about these things? So if you're talking about the unmet need in breast cancer with a certain biomarker, do we hear people start to talk about that more? As you think about other needs, the unmet need to diagnose, the unmet need to test, are people starting to communicate about the themes and messages? And can we quantify that? And can we start to see that change over time? So sometimes we call that sentiment analysis, sometimes we call it thematic extraction, but it's really a matter of understanding, are people talking about the things that are important to you? From that, you can build and you can keep building upon this, right? After thematics and sentiment, are people engaged with your clinical trials? How do they feel about the results of your clinical information? Do they find it to be evidence generating, or is it going to be clinical behavior changing, right? Again, a little bit more on how people are thinking about the things that you're talking about and getting that feedback. And then the real big shift comes, which is starting to understand HCP behavior, right? Are people getting more testing based on the things that you think are important? Is there more diagnosis based on those testing and those biomarkers that's relevant to your disease? Can you see more patients get treated with evidence-based care? And then ultimately, can you see patient outcomes actually improving? And can you start to measure those things in a granularity that's relevant so that your organization can understand it and make decisions on it? That's really the kind of ultimate goal of medical impact. Are we seeing that, HCP behaviors are changing and patient outcomes are improving?
So it's hard to follow now because I think you covered a lot, and I think everything you said is spot on. I guess just to put a little maybe framework around some of the different things you described. I think historically, right? So we have been trying to, and I'm not honestly a big fan of this kind of categorization, but historically we have been trying to put KPIs for medical affairs in two buckets, right? The qualitative and quantitative. So the quantitative are things like reach and frequency, number of publication, that kind of things that are very measurable. And then the qualitative are more those that are harder to actually specifically put a number on, like sentiment and some of the other things that you mentioned. But I think this historically was where the two categories. As I said, I'm not a big fan because I just don't think you will get a full story just by looking at qualitative and quantitative KPIs. To me, a better way of looking at measuring impact of medical affairs is really to identify and leverage two different groups of metrics. One is the first group is those KPIs that are standard, like share of scientific voice. You can measure share of scientific voice. It's very measurable. You actually get to a point that you have specific numbers for a share of scientific voice. And the methodology to measure something share of scientific voice is fairly standard, right? So, or sentiment, or some of the other kind of common KPIs that we use, or standardized KPIs that we use. The reason why those are important, it's because they are giving you a sense of how you are tracking with respect to the industry, right? With respect to other medical affairs organizations in your same therapeutic area or in your same space. So those are, as I said, very important to tell you how you are positioned within the industry. Then you have your specific KPIs, those that may not be relevant if you are in another therapeutic area, let's say a biomarker testing, just to give a very simple and illustrative example. That's something that may be relevant for you because you are working on a cholesterol drug or an oncology drug that has a specific test or biomarker that you want to track over time, but may not be relevant for the vast majority of the other medical affairs organizations. But having those is extremely powerful because, again, it's very, very specific to what you are trying to do in the marketplace. Again, if you are trying to educate the community on the importance of doing a certain test or measuring a certain biomarker, that's extremely powerful to measure over time, because if you see that after your intervention, whatever that may be, MSLs or CME or whatever educational activity you do, if you see that that biomarker testing rate is going up, then it means that probably you're doing a good job. If you are seeing that it's not moving the needle at all, then you may want to change your mix and change your strategy. Another great example, just to mention at least another one, is the appropriate utilization of your medicine. Let's say that you have a medicine that is approved. I'm in oncology, so let's say it's a medicine that is approved in a certain tumor type in second line. If you are seeing that the actual utilization of that medicine is mostly happening in third, fourth, fifth line instead of second line, it means that probably it's not really being utilized according to the label, according to the guidelines, according to where that particular medicine was actually investigated in the clinical trials. So that to me speaks to a utilization of the medicine that is not is suboptimal, and that's where, again, with your medical affairs initiatives, you can try to improve upon. And again, tracking that over time, if you see that after several months doing some educational activities, whatever that those may be, you are seeing more of a shift towards the appropriate utilization of your medicine. That means that you're doing a good job. And again, the beauty of this second group, the kind of specific metrics, is that you can really customize those to the very specific needs you or your organization have. And I think the value of those is extremely powerful, and combined with the common metrics or standard metrics that helps you to understand where you are with respect to the industry, it really gives you a full picture. in my view, of how you are doing, how you are tracking, and it gives you something you can act upon. So that's my kind of high level framework when it comes to KPIs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Luca's saying. When I was in the field, my ratings were judged by advocacy scores, right? And I scored my HCPs, whether they were a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that was the only information way back in the day that my company had to see if I was being effective. The amount of data that we have at our fingertips now allows us not only to look at those 50, 75 KOLs that I was calling on to see if, I was being effective as an MSL, but now I can look at thousands of clinicians and understand if they're doing more of those things. I started in cardiometabolism. So again, were they testing for LDL? Were they diagnosing patients with elevated LDL? The same kind of thing with what Luca mentioned about biomarkers. These are the actual behaviors that underlied treating effectively, and the behaviors that my organization was valuing in terms of really making sure patients were being treated appropriately. And I didn't have those tools. But now that we have those tools at our fingertips, the data it really kind of forces us to start to understand, are we moving the needle? Are our messages? I supported a product whose indication was something that used to be considered a nuisance, right? And the organization was like, no, this is a chronic inflammatory disease, not just something that you think is a nuisance. So this is what they were going out into the community educating about, right? This disease is chronic, it's inflammatory, it's not just a nuisance. You should be looking for it, you should be testing for it, you should be diagnosing it more. That's a really important message that you want to see getting out there, and you can really start to see HCP behaviors transform without having to go to the commercial side just to see if they're writing a prescription. And so I think we've got a lot of incredible tools at our fingertips that allow us to measure our team's impact in ways we never could before.
Yeah, there's actually another really great question I want to get to. And this one's about AI, another really hot topic I'm sure we all want to talk about a little bit. So maybe I'll direct this to you, Luca, is how can new and emerging technologies like AI and generative AI and tech help medical affairs teams? So maybe you've used AI already, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think, not all AI was created equal, and I think there are different kinds of AI. And I think you already mentioned probably the kind of generative AI, which is like the new kid on the block. But I think we've been using artificial intelligence for some time, mostly on structured data. I think artificial intelligence is really, really good at identifying patterns or signals in high volume of structured data. That's really the strength of artificial intelligence. Minimize or significantly reduce the manual labor of looking at large volume of structured data. I think that's really been the use case for the last, I would say, at least 5 years. Now, the new fancy thing is generative AI, and we've been doing quite a bit of work on generative AI, GPT in particular, over the last several months. Again, it's very new, so I cannot claim to be an expert, but I can tell you some of the kind of different use cases that I think are more promising, and maybe some others that maybe will require a bit more time. I think the one of the KPI we mentioned earlier in the discussion is the sentiment, and sentiment is something that we started to look into probably 3-4 years ago when we started to heavily do social listening. It's very easy, or I think there are some very basic um, AI tools to measure, and I would say most of the social listening platforms offer that feature. That is just based on keywords, right? When a certain keyword, whether it's positive or negative, is being identified by the algorithm, that categorize that particular comment or tweet or social media post either as a positive or negative or neutral sentiment. Now, GPT is really taking that to the next level, right? Because if you think about it with GPT, first of all, it's much more, it's much more powerful at identifying the sentiment because it looks not just at keywords, but it's a bit more nuanced. The other component is that you can also use it on things like your MSL insights. Everyone has, whether it's built in your CRM system or it's a standalone system, everyone has a repository where all the MSL insights are being collected and categorized. Applying GPT to your MSL insights will give you a sentiment on a certain trial, a certain product, a certain whatever you are looking into, and GPT does that quite well. Same with your, let's say, advisory board reports or any other insight data sources, meaning insight sources you may have. You can apply GPT to give you a sense of, is the sentiment positive, negative. I think the next step, and that's what we are working on, that is probably a little aspirational right now, but I don't think we are that far off, is measuring sentiment on a pooled data lake that includes all the different data sources that you are leveraging. Maybe a data lake that includes your MSL insights, MedInfo insights, advisory boards, and social media. So again, that's the beauty of GPT and that artificial intelligence. They can, it can look into all this very diverse, but at the same time rich data set and give you something like sentiment that is an easy thing to do. Maybe just one final use case I'm going to mention. GPT is actually very good at summarizing things. So if you want to create an abstract or if you want to get a summary of a full paper, especially like plain language summaries, that's another very easy, I would say, use case for GPT. Again, don't go out and try to do it yourself, or at least I don't think I can do it myself. I think you really need to rely on experts and people that know what they are doing. But again, by finding the right partner for anything artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to generative AI, you can really do a lot in terms of your decision support, decision augmentation, and potentially in the future, even decision automation. So maybe I'll stop here. I'm sure, Stacey, you have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would gently challenge how easy it is to understand sentiment, only because especially in social media, one of the challenges we hear from our clients is that there's so much information that their social listening teams are gathering, but that they can't weed through the noise from the actual insights. And so if you've ever kind of looked and put in your own drug into Twitter and searched for it, the top results are going to be the analysts, journalists, and bots, right? And so they're going to be the ones who are creating a lot of the quote unquote noise, right? Because they're not the ones you're necessarily targeting. Our field medicine teams and our medical affairs teams are not actively engaging with analysts and journalists, and certainly not bots. But they have an incentive to talk about your drugs, right? They have a financial incentive to get their clicks in their journals and or in their newspaper articles and analyst reports in their financials. And so there's definitely, I think, something that is harder and unique about finding out what HCPs are saying. And then also, as smart as generative AI is, medicine is confusing for it, right? Like lowering HDL is good, lowering LDL is good, lowering HDL is not good. And so the ability for an AI tool to really understand those things is still a challenge and still something that we're working with today. There are libraries being built around these things to be able to support life sciences companies in understanding LDL bad, HDL good, right? That's definitely happening right now, and so I think that that's important to always consider, right? When we're talking to social listening, when we're talking to social listening in our organization, who are they listening to? And is that the relevant audience for medical affairs? Can we find the patients? Can we find the patient advocacy groups? Can we find the HCPs that we want to understand more than the rest of the noise in that arena?
Yeah. And maybe just a final point, and I really want to, kind of acknowledge, and I agree with you. And actually, on like it's not that easy. And you're making a very good point, which is really, what we are actively working on right now. The problem we have with generative AI right now is that what most people know about generative AI is ChatGPT, and the problem with ChatGPT, and the reason why it's basically useless for us in life science or medical affairs in particular, is that it pulls from the World Wide Web, right? So anything that is in the web feeds into Chat GPT, and that's the big problem. It makes stuff up. It's not reliable, and data sources you cannot really control. Anything, whether it's good data source or bad data source, goes in there. And that's why we are using GPT in a controlled environment. We really know what data sources, whether it's our own publications, our medical information letters, we strictly control the data sources that we want GPT to pull from. And that's when you start to have a level of accuracy that, don't get me wrong, anything that is being done by generative AI requires some level of manual proofreading and work after that. But still, kind of the level of reliability is exponentially higher just by strictly controlling the data sources that you are actually feeding into your model. So.
I love that.
Well, I know we're coming up close on time, so we want to take some questions from the audience. So if you haven't had a chance, please type in your questions on the left-hand side of your screen. And now we're going to take a question from the audience. I guess this one we'll direct at you, Luca. Are you currently measuring sentiment via social media or elsewhere? And we kind of just talked about this, but want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think we covered that. I think we are. And again, social media is really just one of the channels or data sources that you can leverage to look into sentiment on your product or trials or whatever you may be interested in. But yes, that's definitely a very powerful one, and definitely the first one that I would say the one that we have the most experience with, just because at least for me, it was the first one.
And do you think AI can have any kickback implications?
I wonder what they mean by kickback. I guess is it self kind of feeding, that you're getting the information that you are looking for, or are we really looking for nefarious actors here? I think that there's
clarify.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of interest right now, right? I think the CEO of ChatGPT was on the Hill yesterday talking to Congress, and so everybody is excited and yet cautious about the power of generative AI. I think that that's the same kind of thing we've heard about every technology that's come before us. And so while organizations are approaching it smartly and with caution, I think that there's huge opportunities out there that we'd be very, we'd be silly to miss out on. And so I think it's that balance, right? It's that balance of making smart decisions, engaging with our compliance colleagues, getting a way to, yes, I always say, right? Like, this isn't about it's not about a them or us. It's what's the right answer? What's the yes for our organization? Is it, here, or is it further along? And so I think it's about making those smart decisions with smart partners who can keep us safe and help us think about the questions we're not asking.
And maybe just a quick comment on that. I think you're bringing up a extremely important point, and I think it's extremely. I mean, I think it's critical to reinforce that anytime we are dealing with any of these new technologies, honestly, we need to work in lockstep with our compliance and regulatory colleagues. I mean, it's very easy to get excited by kind of new technologies, and similar to what we did back in the days when we first started with social listening. It was truly like an open dialogue, and step by step we were working alongside our compliance colleagues. Exact same applies to artificial intelligence. I think it's paramount, and again, that's why I keep emphasizing that not all artificial intelligence was created equal, because it's really important that, number one, you work with experts, like technical experts in the field, and number two, you work with the regulatory and legal and compliance experts on the other side.
Great. Thank you both so much. I know we're just going to wrap up. So if there's any closing thoughts or key takeaways you wanted to leave the audience with.
I can probably just say, again, in the topic of measuring impact of medical affairs, especially given the results of the poll, I would just say, as I mentioned earlier, please start small, start simple. You don't have to have 20,000 KPIs and very sophisticated models. You just need to start simple. Just think of your goals, your objectives, and where you want to go with your educational efforts, and everything you are doing from a medical affairs standpoint, and try to just identify one or two very simple KPIs that you can track over time. Again, you can work with a partner that will help you with things like share of scientific voice or sentiment or artificial intelligence. But again, just start simple. You don't need to have many. You just need a few that are truly meaningful to you. And I think that's the best probably advice I can give.
No, I don't think I could have said it better than that. There are opportunities every day to find an impact measure that is going to be relevant to your organization. And starting simple is going to be the most effective way to actually kick it off with your organization. If it's a diagnosis, if it's a test, if it's a procedure, think about that one meaningful thing you're trying to impact in the medical landscape and start measuring it. Find the data, find the partner, find ways to start understanding your strategies and how they're really impacting HCP behaviors and eventually patient outcomes.
Great. Thank you both. And thank you all for attending the Fierce Biotech webinar and submitting great questions. I'd like to thank our speakers for participating and H1 for sponsoring today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you.